"I don't know how to be loved," she whispered. What the Apache man said broke her walls. Elena had always been a strong woman. From the outside, people saw her as someone who could face anything. She had a good job, a comfortable apartment, and friends who admired her. But deep inside, there was a quiet emptiness she could not easily explain. It was not sadness that everyone could notice. It was more like a silent ache, a loneliness that stayed hidden beneath the surface. She had grown used to it, like a shadow that followed her wherever she went. She had learned to smile and laugh, to make jokes and help others. But very few people ever saw the real her. And the real her was someone who did not know how to be loved. Her childhood had shaped her in ways she did not fully understand until she grew older. Her parents loved her, but their love was not the kind that made her feel safe or cherished. Her mother was a quiet woman, always busy with household tasks and her own worries. She rarely said, "I love you," or praised Elena when she did something well. Her father worked long hours and was strict, expecting Elena to behave well and succeed in school. Mistakes were corrected immediately, and achievements were often taken for granted. There was very little laughter or warmth in the house, and even less conversation about feelings. Emotions were something to hide, something to control. As a result, Elena learned early to rely on herself. She learned to be independent before she even knew what the word meant. She would wake up early to finish her chores, make sure everything at home was in order, and help her younger siblings with their homework. If she cried, she did it alone. If she was scared, she faced it quietly. She became excellent at managing her own emotions, but she thought that love meant responsibility, not care. She thought that being loved meant doing everything right, never showing weakness, and always staying strong. School was both a relief and a challenge for her. She loved learning because it allowed her to focus on something beyond the walls of her home. But making friends was difficult. Elena often felt like an outsider, even among children who smiled and laughed freely. She observed how other kids hugged their parents or told them secrets, and she wondered what that felt like. Sometimes she tried to imitate it, to reach out or to trust someone, but it never came naturally. She felt awkward and unsure, as if there was a part of her that did not know how to connect. As she grew into a teenager, the patterns became clearer. She became very good at reading people and situations. She learned when to speak, when to remain quiet, and how to avoid trouble. She developed a strong sense of responsibility, always thinking about what she should do rather than what she wanted to feel. At the same time, she began to build walls around herself. She would keep her thoughts and feelings hidden, convinced that no one could truly understand her. Vulnerability felt dangerous, and she promised herself that she would never let anyone see her weaknesses. Relationships with boys were especially challenging. When someone showed interest in her, she felt a mix of curiosity and fear. She wanted to be close, but she also feared being hurt. Often she would push people away before they could leave her. She chose partners who were unavailable or distant, as if unconsciously seeking relationships that matched the emotional emptiness she had always known. She gave her heart cautiously, but she gave her time and effort generously, hoping that would be enough to make someone stay. She learned to expect disappointment and became skilled at hiding the hurt it caused. College gave Elena some freedom, but it did not change the core of her experience. She moved to a new city, lived in a dorm, and made acquaintances, but friendships never went very deep. She focused on her studies, aiming for a career that would give her independence and stability. She thought that success could replace intimacy, that achievements could fill the emptiness inside her. She was ambitious, driven, and disciplined, but no matter how much she accomplished, the quiet ache inside remained. After graduating, she landed a job she enjoyed and worked hard to build a life she could be proud of. She rented a small apartment, decorated it with things that made her feel calm and safe, and made a few close friends, but her relationships continued to follow the same pattern. She would meet someone, feel a spark of connection, and then pull away when it got too close. She told herself she was protecting herself, that she could not afford to be hurt again. She became an expert at surviving without love, at managing without help, and at facing life alone. Then came the relationship that finally ended in a quiet heartbreak. It was not dramatic. There were no shouting matches or betrayal. It simply ended because she had not let herself fully trust or receive love. She had expected the other person to see her walls and still stay. When they left, it reinforced her belief that being alone was safer. She felt the familiar sting of loss, but she also felt relief, as if her protective walls had kept her safe once again. After that breakup, Elena felt a deep need to step away from everything familiar. She needed silence, space, and time to think. She wanted to be alone, without distractions, to understand herself in a way she never had before. She decided to take a solo trip to the American Southwest, drawn by the idea of wide-open spaces, deserts, and mountains. She hoped the vast landscapes would quiet the restlessness inside her and offer her some clarity. Packing her bag was simple. She brought only what she needed, preferring lightness over excess. She left behind her phone for long stretches, choosing instead to walk, observe, and reflect. She wanted to escape the expectations of the city, the pressure of work, and the routines that had kept her moving but never fulfilled. She hoped the journey would help her discover something about herself, something she had never been able to put into words. Her first days on the trip were both exhilarating and intimidating. The desert was beautiful, but it was also harsh and unfamiliar. She marveled at the vast skies, the colors of the rocks, and the silence that seemed to stretch endlessly. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly small in the world. The realization was both freeing and uncomfortable. She was alone, and yet the solitude felt strangely alive, as if the land itself were holding her presence and acknowledging her existence. In the evenings, she would sit by herself under the stars, feeling the quiet more intensely than she had ever felt in the city. She noticed things she had never paid attention to, the way the wind moved over the sand, the sounds of nocturnal animals, the way the air smelled after a brief rain. Each observation grounded her, made her feel present, and slowly started to awaken feelings she had long ignored. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel small joys: the warmth of the sun, the beauty of a cactus in bloom, the softness of a blanket under her arms. Yet even in these moments, the loneliness persisted. She realized that no amount of nature, no matter how breathtaking, could replace human connection. She missed laughter shared freely, a gentle touch, a conversation that went beyond surface topics. But she also recognized that this trip was not about replacing what was missing. It was about learning to sit with it, to understand it, and to see what she truly wanted from life. Elena began to reflect on her past, tracing the patterns of her relationships and her fears. She asked herself why she had built such high walls, why she had avoided love, and why she had become so skilled at surviving alone. She wrote in a small notebook she carried with her, trying to put words to the feelings she could rarely speak aloud. Slowly, she began to recognize that her walls were not just about fear. They were also about self-protection, a strategy that had kept her safe, but had also kept her from experiencing connection. As she walked through small towns and quiet trails, she saw people who seemed to live with an ease she had never known. Couples walked hand in hand, families shared meals, friends laughed together. She felt a pang of longing, but not resentment. Instead, she felt curiosity, a gentle, cautious curiosity about what it might be like to let someone in, to allow herself to be cared for, and to learn that vulnerability could also be a strength. One afternoon, while exploring a cultural heritage center near a reservation, she noticed an older man guiding a small group. He spoke softly, with patience, and had a presence that seemed to make people feel calm. She listened quietly from a distance, intrigued by the way he shared stories about the land and his people. There was something about him, a kind of wisdom that was quiet but powerful. Something about his calm attention made her feel noticed without being judged. It was in these moments, surrounded by the vast desert and the stillness of the land, that Elena began to sense a shift inside herself. She did not yet understand what it was, but she felt a gentle stirring, a small opening in the walls she had built for so long. She realized that this journey was about more than just seeing new places. It was about discovering a part of herself she had long neglected, the part that could learn to be seen, to feel, and maybe, one day, to be loved. She had no idea that this trip would lead her to a person who could touch that part of her in ways she had never imagined, someone who would help her see that being loved was not a danger, but a possibility. Someone who would show her that strength was not in hiding her heart, but in letting it open. For now, though, Elena simply walked. She walked through the desert, under the endless sky, and into the quiet spaces inside herself. She observed, she reflected, and she began, slowly, to notice feelings she had long ignored. The walls were still there, strong and high, but for the first time in her life she felt the faintest hint that maybe, just maybe, they could be opened. And in that quiet, solitary way, she began her journey, not only across the desert, but toward herself. Elena walked along the dusty trail, the sun warm on her shoulders and the wind carrying the faint scent of sagebrush. She had been exploring the desert for days, and each path led her to new landscapes, rocky hills that seemed to touch the sky, narrow canyons with shadows that changed every hour, and quiet valleys where only the sound of the wind could be heard. There was something comforting about the solitude. It was a place where she did not have to explain herself, a place where no one could judge her. One afternoon she arrived at a cultural heritage center near a small reservation. It was a simple place, built with respect for the land, surrounded by the desert and the mountains. There were displays about the history of the people who had lived here for generations, stories about survival, community, and connection to the land. Elena felt drawn to it, sensing that she might find something she did not yet understand, something that could speak to the quiet ache inside her. As she entered, she noticed a small group gathered around an older man. He was not tall or flashy, but there was a calm presence about him. His hair was long and gray, tied carefully at the back, and his eyes held a depth that seemed to look right into the world. He spoke slowly, deliberately, pausing between sentences as if giving every word time to settle. Elena stepped closer, hoping to hear what he had to say. He began telling the story of the land. He did not speak like a teacher lecturing students. He spoke like a storyteller, like someone sharing a piece of himself with anyone who would listen. He described the desert as a living being, not just rocks and sand. He talked about the wind, the rain, and the seasons as teachers. He said the land could survive storms, but it also knew when to rest. Elena listened quietly, feeling a strange familiarity in his words, as if they were describing a truth she had always known but could not name. The group followed him along a winding path, and Elena joined them, walking slowly so she could absorb the surroundings. Thomas, the man she would later remember, showed them how plants survived in the harsh desert, explaining how each had its own way of storing water and protecting itself. He spoke about balance, about knowing when to act and when to wait. Elena was struck by the simplicity and clarity of his teachings. They were not lectures or moral lessons, they were stories that invited understanding, stories that asked her to look deeper. As they walked, Thomas paused to point out a small cactus growing in the shadow of a rock. "See this one?" he said. "It survives because it knows how to protect itself, but it also reaches for the sun. Survival and growth are connected. You cannot have one without the other." Elena felt a shiver run through her. She did not know why, but his words touched something buried inside her. She thought about her own life, about how she had learned to protect herself, how she had built walls so high that few could ever reach her, and yet she had never allowed herself to grow fully. She had survived, but she had not known how to open to life, to people, to love. Later, the group stopped near a small fire pit where Thomas began telling stories of his people. He spoke of hardship and loss, but also of resilience and hope. He shared stories of children learning to trust again after being hurt, of families who rebuilt themselves after tragedy, of communities that survived storms by relying on one another. His words were gentle, never forcing emotion, but they carried a weight that made Elena feel something shift inside her. She remained after the group had dispersed, sitting quietly by the fire. The sky above was vast and painted with shades of orange and pink as the sun began to set. The air was cool, and the sounds of the desert at dusk created a peaceful rhythm. Thomas noticed her sitting alone and offered a small smile. It was not a smile meant to charm or impress. It was a smile that simply acknowledged her presence without judgment. For a long time they sat in silence. Elena did not feel the need to speak. She simply watched the flames and listened to the quiet. Finally, almost without thinking, she whispered, "I don't know how to be loved." She had carried that truth inside her, hidden behind layers of self-reliance and control. But saying it made it real. She felt exposed, vulnerable, yet also strangely relieved. Thomas did not react with shock, surprise, or pity. He simply nodded, as if her words were expected, as if he had been waiting to hear them. "I understand," he said softly. "You are not alone in that feeling." He told her that many people, especially those who have learned to survive difficult circumstances, do not know how to receive love. They know how to give, how to endure, how to fight and protect themselves, but they are not taught how to open their hearts. Love, he explained, is not a prize or a reward. It is not something earned. It is something that can be accepted when the heart is ready. Elena listened, fascinated. He spoke of vulnerability as strength, of trust as a skill that could be learned, and of healing as a journey rather than a destination. He shared examples from his own life and from the lives of those he had known. He did not tell her what to do. He did not pressure her. He simply shared stories that illuminated truths she had never considered. As the evening darkened, the desert revealed a sky full of stars. Elena felt small beneath the vastness, yet safe in a way she could not explain. Thomas pointed to the sky and said, "The stars have always been there, but we only notice them when we pause and look. Love is like that. It is always around, but we must learn to notice it and to allow it in." Something in Elena shifted. She realized she had spent so much of her life avoiding hurt, avoiding loss, avoiding disappointment, that she had also avoided the possibility of love. She had built walls to survive storms, but she had not learned that storms pass and the sun comes again. She had been protecting herself from pain, but in the process, she had prevented herself from feeling connection, warmth, and care. Thomas spoke about the desert as a teacher. He said that just as the land survives harsh seasons and blooms when the time is right, humans too can survive emotional storms and grow when they allow themselves to. Elena thought about her own life, about the losses she had endured, and the walls she had built. She began to see that her strength had been in survival, but her growth had been stifled by fear. She felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, curiosity, and a quiet hope. Relief that she no longer needed to pretend she had it all together. Curiosity about what it might feel like to allow someone to care for her. Hope that perhaps she could learn to receive love without fear. For hours, she and Thomas sat by the fire, talking quietly. He asked her questions not to judge or guide, but to help her explore her own thoughts and feelings. He told stories about his people and their ways of understanding life, love, and connection. He spoke of balance, of patience, and of the courage it takes to be seen. Elena listened, feeling the walls inside her beginning to tremble, though she did not yet know how far they could fall. As the night deepened, Elena realized she had not felt this calm in years. There was no pressure, no expectation, no judgment. She could simply be herself, and someone else could see her and respond with understanding and care. It was an unfamiliar sensation, but one that felt safe enough to explore. Before leaving the fire, Thomas said something that stayed with her. "You have learned to survive. Now, perhaps, you are ready to learn how to live in connection." Elena did not fully understand them yet, but she felt their meaning. She felt a spark of possibility, a quiet seed of change. She had always believed that survival was enough. Now, she realized that there could be more. There could be growth, connection, and even love. When she finally returned to her small campsite that night, Elena felt a sense of peace she had not known before. The desert was no longer just a place of solitude. It had become a place of reflection, learning, and awakening. And Thomas, with his calm presence and gentle wisdom, had shown her a new way of looking at herself and the world. For the first time in her life, Elena considered that she might not be broken, that she might not be unworthy of care. She began to wonder what it would be like to let someone in, to trust again, and to allow herself to receive love. It was a frightening thought, but also an exciting one. As she drifted off to sleep under the stars, Elena felt something she had not felt in years: hope. It was quiet and tentative, like the first light of dawn, but it was there. And in that quiet hope, she realized that her journey was only just beginning. Elena woke early the next morning, the sky still tinged with soft pink and gold, the desert quiet except for the occasional bird or rustle of wind. She felt lighter than she had in years, though she could not explain why. The previous night's conversations with Thomas had left a gentle warmth in her chest, like the embers of a fire that had not gone out. She made herself a small breakfast at the campsite, thinking about what he had said, that survival was not enough, that growth and connection were also possible. She decided to visit the Heritage Center again, hoping to hear more of his stories. As she approached the small group gathering near the fire pit, she saw Thomas already speaking, his calm presence drawing people in quietly. Today, he was telling a story about a family that had lived on the land for generations. He spoke not of wealth or fame, but of simple acts of care, teaching children to respect the earth, helping neighbors when they struggled, sharing food and water during harsh times. Elena listened, noticing how he spoke with patience and thoughtfulness. There was no rush, no need to impress. His words were steady, deliberate, and they carried an energy she had never experienced before. He did not demand attention. He invited it. He did not offer advice in the form of commands. He told stories that allowed people to draw their own understanding. It was different from anything Elena had experienced. After the small group dispersed, she lingered again by the fire. She felt a mixture of nervousness and curiosity. She wanted to ask more questions, but she worried she would sound foolish. Finally, she gathered the courage to speak. I think I have spent my whole life avoiding love, she admitted softly. I don't even know how to accept it. Thomas nodded as if he had been expecting her to say that. Many people live that way, he said. They learn to survive, but no one teaches them how to receive. Strength is praised, but receiving care is not. Yet both are needed for the heart to grow. Elena felt a strange comfort in his words. He was not judging her. He was not telling her she had done anything wrong. He was simply naming something she had always known but had never allowed herself to see. She realized she had been hiding behind her independence, believing that needing someone or accepting help would make her weak. But now she saw that perhaps the opposite was true. Perhaps letting someone in required a kind of courage she had never recognized. Thomas leaned back slightly, his eyes scanning the horizon. The desert is harsh, he said. It teaches you to survive. But even here, life blooms when it receives water. Even the strongest cactus opens its flowers when the season is right. Strength and openness are not enemies. They are partners. Elena thought about her own life, about the walls she had built. They had kept her safe, yes, but they had also kept her from connection, from joy, and from understanding herself. She realized that she had been protecting herself from the very thing she wanted most, the possibility of being loved. He continued, speaking of his people's traditions. He told her how, in the past, elders would guide children not by force, but by stories. They would teach lessons about respect, courage, and care through narratives that allowed the listener to see themselves in the story. Love, trust, and patience were learned through example and reflection. Elena felt herself absorbing every word. It was as if the desert itself were speaking to her, not just Thomas. At one point he said something that made her pause. You have built walls to survive storms, but storms are not forever. The sun returns, and when it does, the walls you built to protect yourself can also keep you from the warmth you need. Elena swallowed hard. His words struck her deeply. She realized that for decades she had feared the pain of loss more than she desired the experience of love. Her walls were no longer just protection. They were prisons she had constructed for herself. She thought about her family, her past relationships, the friends she had distanced herself from. She understood, perhaps for the first time, that avoiding pain had cost her more than she had realized. She sat silently for a long moment, feeling the wind against her face, the fire's warmth fading with the rising sun. Thomas did not interrupt. He waited patiently, allowing her to process her thoughts. Finally, she spoke again, voice barely above a whisper. But how do I change? I've been this way for so long. Thomas smiled gently. Change is not sudden, he said. It is gradual. You start small. You let one wall down, just a little. You allow yourself to feel something new. You practice receiving, not giving. You practice trust, even if it is just with yourself at first. Each small act is a step. Elena felt a mix of fear and excitement. She wanted to believe him, but part of her was terrified. Letting someone in meant risking hurt, disappointment, and exposure. But she also recognized a longing she could no longer ignore. The desire to feel safe with someone, to be seen, to be cared for without conditions. She realized that she had been denying herself a chance at this for far too long. Thomas spoke again, telling her a story of a young woman from his community. She had grown up like Elena, strong and independent, careful not to show weakness. But through small acts of courage, she learned to open her heart. She learned to accept kindness, to ask for help, and to let others care for her. Slowly, her walls softened, and she discovered that being loved did not diminish her strength. It enriched it. Elena listened, mesmerized. She felt as if the story were not just about the young woman, but also about herself. She realized that she could begin the same journey, step by step, learning to let the world in, rather than keeping it out. The conversation shifted to the idea of self-compassion. Thomas explained that many people are harsher on themselves than anyone else could be. They judge their feelings, criticize their mistakes, and fear their own vulnerability. Elena recognized this in herself. She had always demanded perfection, even from her own emotions. She had felt ashamed for feeling lonely, afraid, or uncertain. Now she saw that accepting herself as she was, with her fears and strengths, was the first step toward allowing others to love her. He pointed toward the horizon, where the desert met the sky. "Look at the land," he said. "It survives storms, but it also opens to the rain. You must allow yourself to open, even if the storm might return. Strength is not closing the heart. Strength is knowing it can open again." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. She had never heard anyone speak so plainly and gently about the walls she had built. She had spent so many years believing that vulnerability was weakness. Now she realized that the courage to open her heart was the truest form of strength she had ever known. They spent the rest of the day walking slowly through the desert trails. Thomas continued to share stories about the land and its people, about survival and trust, about pain and healing. Elena asked questions, and he answered thoughtfully, never rushing or judging. She began to notice small shifts in herself, a willingness to pause, to reflect, to consider feelings she had ignored. She realized she was starting to practice what he had called receiving, even in small ways. By the time evening arrived, they sat again by the fire. The sky was dark, dotted with stars, and the desert was quiet except for the occasional wind. Elena felt a deep calm. She realized that her journey was not just about walking through the desert, but about walking through herself, exploring parts she had hidden for years. She spoke again, hesitantly. "I want to change. I want to learn, to receive, to trust, to feel. But I don't know if I can." Thomas nodded. "You can," he said simply. "It will take time, patience, and courage. But every step you take matters. You are not alone in this journey. The land, the stories, and those who care will guide you if you allow them." Elena felt hope rising inside her. She realized that this was the first time she had ever believed, truly believed, that she could be loved, not for what she did, but for who she was. She had spent so much of her life protecting herself that she had never known this possibility. Now the possibility was real, and she was ready, in small ways, to take it. As she lay down that night in her tent, the desert air cool and fragrant, Elena thought about the lessons of the day. She thought about survival and openness, about courage and vulnerability, about walls and the spaces between them. For the first time she felt that she might not be defined by fear. She might not be forever closed off. She might, one day, allow herself to be loved fully. And in that quiet desert night, with the stars above and the fire's warmth fading in her memory, Elena understood something profound. Breaking walls does not happen all at once. It happens in moments, in small acts of courage, in the willingness to see oneself clearly and honestly, and she was ready to begin that process. Elena returned home from the desert with a heart that felt both heavier and lighter than it had in years. She had spent so long carrying walls inside her that had kept her safe, but also kept her lonely. Now, after weeks of walking under the endless sky, listening to Thomas's calm words, and observing the desert in its quiet strength, she felt something stirring deep within her. It was not a sudden transformation. She did not suddenly feel healed or fearless, but it was a quiet, steady shift. She felt hope, fragile yet real, and the first inkling that she could learn to accept care and love without fear. Her apartment looked the same as she had left it, neat and orderly, filled with the things she had collected over the years: books, plants, a few treasured mementos from travels. But Elena herself had changed. She noticed it in small ways at first. She walked more slowly, pausing to feel the air around her. She noticed the sunlight through the windows in the morning and let herself linger by the warmth of it. She drank her coffee on the balcony rather than rushing to work. These were small, almost imperceptible gestures, but they were signs that she was beginning to allow herself to exist fully in the present, rather than always moving, always protecting. She reached out to a few friends she had kept in touch with, sending messages she would normally have deleted after a moment of hesitation. She admitted to them that she had been away, that she had been processing some things, and that she was trying to make small changes in her life. She expected little response, because she had long believed that reaching out could lead to disappointment. But their warm replies surprised her. They were encouraging, kind, and patient. She realized that trust could start small, in simple exchanges that carried no risk of heartbreak, only connection. Elena also reflected on her past relationships. She remembered the patterns that had repeated themselves, choosing partners who were emotionally distant, giving too much while expecting little, withdrawing at the first sign of vulnerability. She realized that those patterns had been her way of protecting herself, and that while they had kept her safe, they had also kept her from experiencing love fully. She began to write in her journal each day, not only recording events but examining her thoughts, fears, and feelings. This act of honesty with herself was a small, courageous step. She began to see her emotions not as weaknesses, but as guides that could help her grow. At work, she noticed a subtle change in her interactions with colleagues. She allowed herself to be more open, to listen without immediately preparing a response, and to accept help when it was offered. She had always prided herself on independence, but now she realized that asking for support did not make her weak. It made her human. This was a lesson she had learned slowly, but the effect was profound. She felt lighter, more connected, and more capable of genuine engagement. A few weeks after returning, Elena met someone new at a local community event. She felt the familiar stirrings of curiosity and fear. Old habits whispered that she should keep her distance, that opening her heart was too risky. But this time, she remembered Thomas's words about strength and openness. She allowed herself to stay present, to engage in conversation without immediately evaluating what might go wrong. She listened, asked questions, and shared pieces of herself, not everything, but enough to feel genuine connection. As their acquaintance grew, she faced moments of fear and doubt. She noticed herself resisting the urge to close off when he expressed kindness or affection. She recognized the tension in her chest when vulnerability approached, and she practiced sitting with it rather than fleeing. Each small act of courage, each decision to stay present rather than withdraw, felt like opening a tiny window in her heart that had long been sealed shut. Elena also began to cultivate a practice of self-compassion. She noticed that she had been her harshest critic, judging herself for feeling lonely, for making mistakes, for being imperfect. Inspired by the lessons of the desert and Thomas's gentle guidance, she learned to speak kindly to herself, to acknowledge her efforts, and to recognize her own worth. She realized that love could not fully reach her if she did not first allow herself to be loved by herself. Her friendships deepened as well. She started to share feelings she had kept hidden, small fears and joys alike. She discovered that her friends responded with warmth and understanding, that sharing vulnerability could strengthen bonds rather than weaken them. Each interaction built her confidence in being seen and cared for. She realized that the walls she had built to protect herself were no longer necessary in the same way. They could be lowered, step by step, without the fear of collapse. There were setbacks, of course. Some days Elena felt the old patterns tugging at her, urges to withdraw, to isolate, to protect herself. She would feel the familiar anxiety, the whisper of fear that had guided her for decades. But instead of giving in immediately, she reminded herself of the lessons she had learned in the desert, that growth was gradual, that courage could be practiced in small steps, that the heart could open slowly and safely. She began to treat each setback not as failure but as an opportunity to practice resilience and openness. One evening she reflected on how far she had come. She realized that the walls she had once thought unbreakable were now showing cracks, not in a frightening way, but in a hopeful one. She had started to experience what it felt like to receive care, to be seen, and to be understood. She had started to recognize her own strength not in isolation, but in connection with others. She felt gratitude for the desert, for Thomas, and for the lessons she had learned there. Elena noticed subtle changes in her everyday life as well. She allowed herself to enjoy small pleasures without guilt, a warm cup of tea in the morning, a long walk without purpose, a conversation with a friend without analysis. She learned to pause and appreciate moments rather than constantly striving, protecting, or controlling. These practices, though simple, were transformative. They reminded her that love and care were not distant ideals, but experiences that could be welcomed in small ways every day. As her relationship with the new partner developed, Elena experienced moments of fear and excitement. She noticed the tension in her chest when he expressed affection, and she recognized it as a signal of her old habits trying to assert control. But this time, she allowed herself to feel the emotion without judgment. She allowed herself to receive care, to enjoy the feeling of being valued and cherished. She discovered that love was not a threat to her independence, but a complement to it. Elena also reflected on her past and felt a sense of compassion for her younger self. She remembered the girl who had learned to survive by building walls, who had endured loneliness and pain with quiet determination. She realized that those experiences had made her strong, but that strength could now coexist with openness. She no longer saw her past as a source of shame, but as the foundation for growth. Over time, Elena began to embrace a life that balanced independence and connection. She continued to pursue her career, maintain her friendships, and care for herself, but she did so with a new awareness that vulnerability and trust were not weaknesses, but strengths. She allowed herself to experience joy fully, to accept love without fear, and to nurture the relationships that mattered. One afternoon, as she sat by a window with sunlight pouring over her, Elena realized that she no longer whispered to herself, "I don't know how to be loved." That phrase, once a quiet confession of fear and isolation, had been replaced by something new, a quiet confidence that she could receive care, embrace connection, and open her heart step by step. She understood that growth was not a destination, but a journey, and that every act of courage, every moment of openness was part of that journey. Elena smiled softly, feeling a sense of peace she had never known. She knew she would still face moments of doubt, fear, and old habits. She knew that life would not be without challenges, but she also knew that she had begun to rewrite the story of her heart. She had learned that being loved was not about perfection or control, but about trust, courage, and the willingness to open herself to the world. As the days passed, she continued to practice the lessons she had learned. She allowed herself to ask for help, to share her thoughts and feelings, to enjoy moments of intimacy without retreating. She nurtured her friendships and explored her new relationship with care, awareness, and patience. Each day brought small victories, moments of connection, and a growing sense of self-compassion. Elena's life was not perfect. She still had fears, doubts, and moments of loneliness, but she had changed in a fundamental way. She had discovered that love was not a danger to be avoided, but a possibility to be embraced. She had discovered that strength could coexist with vulnerability, that independence could coexist with connection, and that her heart could open slowly but surely to the world and the people in it. And in this quiet, steady transformation, Elena found the freedom she had long sought. She realized that being loved was not about changing who she was. It was about allowing herself to be seen, fully and honestly, and trusting that the world could respond with care. It was about learning to open, and in opening, discovering the depth and richness of life she had long denied herself. For the first time in years, Elena felt whole, not because her life was perfect, but because she had learned to walk through it with courage, openness, and the willingness to receive love. The walls that had once defined her were no longer barriers. They were guides, showing her where she had been and how far she had come, and as she moved forward, she knew that she could continue to grow, to connect, and to be loved in ways she had never imagined possible.